welcome to Telile Talks. My name is Angel, and today I will be speaking with Silverdonaldcameron. Silverdon is the host and executive producer of thegreeninterview.com. Telile will also be broadcasting Defenders of the Dawn, which is a green rights interview. So you can check that out in the next few weeks. We will be broadcasting that on Telile. So what we're going to talk about is your green rights project, of course, today.
Absolutely.
But what I'd like to start off with is I'd like people who don't know you just tell us a little bit about Silverdonaldcameron.
Silverdonaldcameron. Well, I'm old enough that it's a long story. But,
okay.
But the shortish version of it is I'm a writer, I'm an author, filmmaker, early board member of Telile, as a matter of fact.
Right.
So the Green Rights Project includes 3 films,
Okay.
30 green interviews, and a book. And the book is my 18th book.
Wow.
And with any kind of luck, by no means my last.
Oh, wow, that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, and I live in Almadam. I came to Almadam in 1971, and I've lived different places since a
Right.
little bit, you know.
Right.
But I've never not had a home in Almadam since 1971, and it's always been the center of my little world.
Wow.
So I'm really happy to be here and be doing this.
Tell us a little bit about the Green Rights Project.
Well, the basic, and there's a backstory which we can go
Yes.
to, but the heart of it is that in most countries in the world, citizens have a legal right to a healthy environment. So a legal right to clean air, a legal right to pure water, a legal right to healthy food.
Mm-hmm.
And of the 193 nations in the UN, over 180 have that right. There's only 10 or 12 that don't. The number has changed a little since we started, but among that dozen or so that don't have it are such leading countries as Oman, Cambodia, North Korea, and Canada.
Oh.
And the United States, I should say. And in fairness, you know, also some bigger countries like Japan and China. But most of the countries in the world do have this. And when you have that, then the citizen himself or herself can
Right.
take immediate action on a problem. So, for example, if you look at the Pictou County pulp mill, which is which is actually in both of the 2 larger films that we've done on this.
Right.
That's one on which, as a citizen, you would have no ability. You have no ability to make an impact. Ask the people who live in Pictou; they
Right,
can't
that's
do
right.
anything about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they can only ask the provincial government to take action. But if they lived in any of these other countries, they could go directly to court and to sue the pulp mill for impairing their right to a healthy environment, or sue the government for failing to protect their right to a healthy environment. So the net result of that is citizens have a way more power.
They do.
And it doesn't prevent development, but what it does do is it makes companies come forward and say, okay, this is what we're doing, and this is how we are going to respect your right to a healthy environment. It's a very powerful tool, and so what we did with the project was to go to many countries in the world where these rights are enshrined, and to look at the way citizens use them, and to meet the lawyers who did it. So we went in Argentina and Ecuador and Peru and the Netherlands and the Philippines and England and so on. And basically came back with a report that says to Canadians, look, this is what you're missing. You know, put on the pressure, let's get that here too. Now I'm happy to say the David Suzuki Foundation has been pushing for this almost exactly in the same period we've been working on it.
Okay.
And the latest report from the Environmental and Sustainability Committee of the House of Commons suggests that in the next revision of the Environmental Protection Act, that these rights should be included in the Act. So we may actually be getting them, and there may be some other ways of getting more of these rights for Canada, but that's the gist of it. The gist of it is we as Canadians thought it's wrong that we and our fellow citizens don't have the rights that most people in the world enjoy, and Canadians would probably ask for them if they knew what they were missing. Most Canadians actually, it turns out, think they have them, which is kind of touching.
Right. Exactly.
Inaccurate,
I'd be one
but touching.
to think,
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Wow. So how did you come up with the name Defenders of the Dawn?
Defenders of the Dawn is the area in which we live, Mi'kmaqi, the Mi'kmaq territory, was known as the Dawnlands, and the Mi'kmaq were known to other nations as the people of the Dawn. And so this territory, being the Dawnlands, the people who are out there trying to protect it from the ravages of modern industry, we think are defenders of the Dawn.
Wow, that's a great name, though. It really is.
It is, yeah. Isn't it lovely to think of yourself as one of the people of the Dawnlands? And I hope our Mi'kmaq friends will allow us to think of ourselves that way, too.
That's right. So who else is on your team, your Green Rights team?
It's a very small team.
Okay.
And that's maybe where we should back up to the backstory. The backstory goes back to when I was a columnist for the Halifax Sunday Herald.
Okay.
And I found myself being drawn increasingly to environmental topics, and then hearing these terrific stories about people who are doing fabulous things, in the environmental front, and individual people very largely. And so I kept on writing columns about these things and thinking, wouldn't it be nice to actually meet some of these people? Wouldn't it be nice to hear in more detail, even if you've read their books, but wouldn't it be nice to hear in more detail about what someone like Jane Goodall has been doing, or Paul Watson, or Vandana Shiva, and all of whom we've now interviewed.
Right.
And so I thought, I'd like to do something like a phone out, like As It Happens, where I can sit in my home in Nova Scotia and place a phone call to someone on the other side of the world and talk about what they're doing. Went out to Mount St. Vincent University because they had a studio. They were the leaders in sort of educational television in this region.
Okay.
And they had a great studio, and they had a great sound booth with a good phone line. And I thought, okay, that's the place to do it from.
Right.
Talked to the man in charge, who I knew a little bit. His name was Chris Beckett. And I said, Chris, can I rent that facility for this purpose? And he said, sure you can, but I think you're crazy. And I said, why am I crazy? And he said, because this should be done on video. These are really important interviews. They're going to be of archival importance. When you're long gone, these interviews people will still be looking at these.
Exactly.
You should do it on video. And I said, but I have no ability to do it on video. And he said, no, but I do.
Well, there you go.
And ever since then, we've worked on this together and traveled together. I mean, we went together through South America. We went together to Europe and gone across Canada and the United States and so forth. So basically, that's the heart of the team.
Right.
And there are 3 or 4 other people who are hired on a sort of a contract basis, on an hourly basis.
Yes.
Linda Pinozzo, who's a fabulous journalist, just published a new book with Fernwood, and did a wonderful book about the gray seals.
Okay.
Linda does the research, so before we go for an interview, I say, Linda, we're going out to, Vancouver, and we want to interview so-and-so, and she goes and puts together a research file out of which I develop the interviews. James Hansen, the great scientist about global warming, was our latest, and we did him in Vancouver.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So she does that, and then when we get the interview done, Chris makes an MP3 file of the audio, and that goes off to a woman named Carolyn Gibson in Brookfield, Nova Scotia, who does the transcription.
Okay.
And then we have a couple of web people, our people who maintain the website and so forth. And up until just now, that has been primarily Robert Samson from Petit de Gras.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and so we've had about 5 years when Robert was doing this. He's now gotten too busy, and we're now gone to a guy in Halifax named Kevin Cunningham.
Okay.
And that's just a transition that we're going through now. But all in all, it's about 5 or 6 people.
Wow.
And Chris and I being at the heart of it and spending more time than anyone else, but and the others being hired on as required.
So how long did you work on this project?
Well, we started the Green Interview in 2010.
Okay.
And we'd done about 50, I guess, or so. And a guy named David Boyd came to Halifax, and David had written a book called The Environmental Rights Revolution. And it was about the whole story of how environmental rights had evolved from being discussed first in Stockholm, in the Stockholm Conference in 1972, and how they had then spread around the world very rapidly, the fastest growth of any of the human rights on the books. And so David had spoken at Dow, and I got him for a Green Interview, and we were sitting and talking, and I suddenly realized this, somewhere in the course of all of that, this was kind of like the keys to the kingdom. That because up until then, we'd been doing all these things. We'd done stuff on automobiles and people living sustainably in various ways, and people defending wildlife and biodiversity, and so on and so on and so on. But it gets bewildering, and I think a lot of people have that experience, that they say, man, I'm concerned about ocean acidification and loss of species and global warming and on and on and on. Where should I put my energy? It seems like I'm needed on 100 different fronts.
Right.
And I suddenly thought, wait a minute, if you had environmental rights, that's a tool you could use to address any issue that infringed on your environment at all. You could deal with that way. So I thought, this is like the universal solvent, or something like that. If we had those in Canada, and if Chris and I could put some muscle towards getting those rights for Canadians, that would be probably the biggest contribution we could make to this whole thing. And that's what led us to think, well, okay, how would you do that? And we thought you would go and talk to the people who are making real use of these rights in other countries and,
Yes, that's
and
right.
tell those stories to Canadians.
Have you achieved your goals that you wanted to achieve?
Well, it's
Was
hard.
it there?
You never know, right?
Right.
Because what's the impact of a piece of work like this? It may take years before you see it. But I do know a couple of things have happened. There's now a lawsuit being launched by the Harrietsfield residents over their water pollution, led by a woman named Marlene Brown.
Okay.
And the reason that lawsuit, it's the first private prosecution of an environmental affront in Nova Scotia's history.
Wow.
And it's happened because a fellow down the South Shore, who I think I shouldn't name because I don't know if he wants to be
Okay.
named, but he'd seen the film and he thought, what could we do in Nova Scotia? How could we use those? Are there ways that we could use the
Right.
law, even though we don't have those rights? But are
Right.
there ways that we could use the law to achieve environmental goals? There's a wonderful guy named Jamie Simpson who used to be with the Ecology Action Centre and is now just qualified as an environmental lawyer. And so our man on the South Shore got in touch with Jamie and said, what do you think? And between the two of them, they thought the Harrietsfield one is one that you should be able to win and you should be able to make some real progress with. So that's how that came about. The guy from the South Shore financed it. Jamie Simpson is prosecuting it. Marlene is going to benefit from it. And that comes directly from the film.
Wow.
And there's a similar thing going on with the Brookfield tires, the Lafarge tire burning
I heard about that.
episode.
Yes.
They've just gone to court about that too, and it turns out the reason for that is that an anonymous donor had seen the film, heard about this thing, believed that there should be, that the law should be brought into play here too, and came forward similarly with
Wow.
the funds to advance a lawsuit on that. So we've had some effect,
Yes.
and of course the Suzuki Foundation has been basically singing from the same sheet music,
Mhm.
and now we've got this thing going on at the national level, at the Environmental Protection Act, which I think David Boyd, the guy who started the whole thing,
Yeah.
I think David may very well have been one of the major figures in getting that on the agenda, but it's on the agenda.
Wow.
So this is a very good time to write your MP and tell them that you think Canadians should have these rights.
Yes, and everybody should do that.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah,
anyone,
definitely.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great.
I hope that after Defenders of the Dawn shows on Talil, it'll motivate some people.
I think so.
Yeah.
Because you don't really, I know I'm not a big environmental person, but I do want clean air and water for my children and my children's children. So
Mhm.
whatever can be done, I definitely will.
You'd like your descendants to survive.
I would.
Yeah, I would
would.
too. Yeah.
That's very important.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about your warrior lawyers as well?
Well, this is the book that comes out of, and I was saying earlier, it's a multimedia project,
Right.
and so 3 films and 30 green interviews, and the green interviews, the films sort of lie on top of the green interviews the way the deck of a wharf lies on the pilings,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
And these are some of the pilings. These are the individual interviews. So these are interviews with 15 interviews with lawyers who've been prosecuting green rights and environmental rights in various countries around the world.
Right.
And there's some fabulous stories. I mean, one of the joys of the work I've been doing is I got to meet all these wonderful people who fill you with hope and who have done things that you think, wow, how could, like one here is I think he's, on the front cover, Tony Aposa.
Yeah.
He's a Filipino lawyer,
Okay.
and he went to court because of old-growth forests. He'd been walking in the woods, and he realized the woods were just disappearing at an unsustainable rate. So he went to court on behalf of his own children and of generations yet not born,
Right.
and sued the government for allowing the forests of the Philippines to be destroyed and thus destroying the heritage of future generations. So he went to court about that, and he lost in the first case because the court held that people who didn't exist couldn't sue. And when Tony said, but look at the Constitution, so he appealed, and his whole theory of the law is that it's a way to tell a story.
Right.
And he said, if you tell the story, he says this in the films, but he says if you tell the story, this is told in such a way that the people you want to hear it have to hear it.
Right.
It'll be brought forward with logic and evidence, and there'll be a record of it, and eventually there will be a decision. And if you lose, you sue again, because it's a way of telling the story. So now you
Right.
get to tell it again because you appealed. Well, he appealed, and the Supreme Court ruled in his favor.
Wow.
the result of that is that unborn children, future generations in the Philippines, have to have their rights considered in any decisions that would affect them. That's become known as the Opposa Doctrine, and it's now being used in courts all over the world. It's one guy. Just
Wow.
one guy in the Philippines. So you hear stories like that, and you think, man, there's a lot we can do, There's a lot we can do.
So when you worked on this Green Rights Project, how many countries did you go to?
There's two separate numbers, and one of them is the countries we went to, and the other is the countries from whom we have representation. So we did not go to the Philippines. I really want to go to the Philippines.
Right.
I just fell in love with Tony Opposa. I
Right.
would love to go there and spend some time with him. And he sent me a photograph of a hammock on the beach in front of his house and said, "This is for you when you get here," kind of thing. So, but we didn't go there. We interviewed Tony in New York, actually.
Oh, okay.
And, yeah. So I think, though, that we went to something like 11 or 12 countries in
Wow.
the course of all of this, yeah.
Wow, that is amazing.
And that's not counting, interestingly enough, the First Nations, because, of course, there are some people in the book, for example, John Burroughs, who is on the back cover, I guess. Yeah, this is John Burroughs.
Okay.
John is an Anishinaabe from Northern Ontario.
Okay.
And he makes the point in the book that we have three legal systems in Canada. We have the British common law in most of the English-speaking provinces. We have French civil law in Quebec.
Yes.
But we also have the legal systems of the First Nations, the many First Nations, so with many different and, often compatible. They have a very similar vision of the world,
Right.
so they have a very similar legal system that comes out of that. But there's a whole set of legal principles and legal systems that are in this country, are recognized in the Constitution from 1982, which recognized treaty rights and Aboriginal title. So those are legal systems of Canada too, and they are full of possibilities.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
That is amazing.
I interviewed John Burroughs. I sat there. I have had this sensation only once before in my life, and I'd bought a schooner and I was sailing it from Lunenburg to Discoos in Cape Breton.
Okay.
And I had never really sailed before, and I remember that sensation, a sort of a physical sensation of learning, that as the boat was moving and the wind was blowing, and you could feel all these, you feel the sun on your skin and the movement of the boat, and the way when you pulled the tiller this way, the boat went this way. And,
Right.
it was like a sort of totally dynamic environment, and I got the sense that I was learning as a physical experience. It was like the information was pouring in through the pores of my skin, through my eyes, my ears,
Wow.
everything, and it was like a rush. It was almost like being stoned,
Wow.
And the next time I had that sensation was talking to John Burroughs about Indigenous legal systems, and realizing he was opening up whole vistas of ways of looking at the world that I had never imagined were possible, and that were tremendously stimulating. Yeah.
Wow, that is amazing.
There was a similar little thing with, there's a book about the Mi'kmaq language, Mi'kma'ki, and I have never been able to really read the book, because I start out and I hit up against an idea so early on that it makes me stop cold and think about the implications of that. For example, early in the book there's a comment that the Mi'kmaq have no noun-like word for father.
Right.
Because father is not a thing, it's a relationship. So it makes no sense to talk about a father unless you're talking about the whole complex of father, mother, and child. Right. And I think, how does the world look when you when you look at it that way? Or another one is possession, that in the Mi'kmaq language, and in Gaelic, interestingly enough, hard to express possession. You can't say my wife, my pen, my car. You say the woman who is with me, the pen which is at me. In Gaelic,
yeah.
you say these things, but you can't say mine. Well, think how different the world looks if you can't easily say it's mine. All of a sudden, a lot of the property, battles just simply disappear. If the pen, in a sense, has an existence of its own, a validity separate from you, that you can be associated with it,
Right.
but you can't own it. That changes
true.
the whole world, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought of it that way.
And it's
but
like
true.
that with Aboriginal legal systems. That's
Right.
what we're coming back to. That it's the same sort of thing, that it really makes you rethink all your assumptions about the law and property and relationships and so forth.
Now, do you have any future projects for the Green Rights?
Well, I do. Oddly enough, one of the things that I realized partway through promoting it this past year, went to a number of universities, and particularly to a number of law schools,
Right.
and I thought, it's actually got the potential for being a really exciting course.
Right,
If
exactly.
if you saw the film in the first place and read the book, and then each student picks one of these stories to look into in more detail, and of course the people have stories that are not in the book or the film.
That's right.
There's much additional material there too. And then you have class sessions where the people who've looked into students who've looked into the Tony Appose's work or John Borrow's work or whatever, come back and make their report. And at the end of the thing, I would say, make a submission about what you've learned from your choice of person, and that could be audio, video, or text. Right? Doesn't have to be written anymore.
That's right.
And then at the end of the whole thing, write a little paper on the 3 most important ideas that you've experienced during the whole course. I think it would be, and there are other lawyers that we've interviewed since who are relevant to this, but weren't part of that original group, I think by the end of this thing, everybody would have learned a great deal. And I actually have somebody in Vancouver who is looking into having that created as a part of continuing legal education in the BC Barrister Society.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Are you going to teach the course?
I might. I might, particularly if I could do it online.
Right, that's right. A lot of things are done online, don't they?
Yeah. Why can't I sit in Discourse and teach a course in Vancouver?
That's right. Or travel.
Or travel, or teach it live.
Yeah,
sure.
that's right.
Yeah.
Wow,
And I was also thinking it would make a fabulous, this is like Marjorie, you and Marjorie Simmons have been doing the audiobooks together, and I thought it would be a very interesting audiobook because all the interviews already exist as audio files. So you'd have my introduction, and then each chapter would be one of those interviews.
Yeah,
and,
that could be easily done, though. Honestly, after this, that's no problem. If you send me all the information, I certainly could just do it quick. So maybe we can talk about the Green Rights Maritime Tour that's happening soon.
Absolutely, it begins on the 22nd of September when I'm showing the film and speaking. Actually, showing the Defenders of the Dawn film, not the Green Rights film, the shorter one rather than the longer one.
Right.
At the Equal Connections Conference in Truro, and then from there I go on to Sackville, New Brunswick, and Mount Allison, to Rexton, New Brunswick, which is where the Elsipogtog confrontation took place, which is really important and is in this book and is in the film. And then from Rexton to Fredericton, then to Gagetown and St. John, and on the weekend I'm in Petitcodiac, and that's fun. I had this tour all set up, and somehow the mayor of Petitcodiac found out about the tour and wrote and said, "Could you include Petitcodiac?" And isn't that a neat thing? And I said, "Absolutely." And I'll be driving from St. John to Charlottetown, and then the tour ends in Charlottetown on the 2nd of October. And it came about in an interesting way because Marjorie and I, a year ago, we realized that we wanted to spend the winter in BC.
Right.
And she had a new book, and I had a new book and a film out, and she can't fly very easily. She's got terribly sensitive ears, and tends to have her eardrums burst occasionally, and that sort of thing. So, and we have 2 dogs. So if you want to go to Vancouver from Cape Breton, and you can't fly, and then you've got to go by bus, which you're not going to work very well with 2 dogs.
No.
Or you could go by train, but that won't work very well with 2 dogs either. Or you can drive. And we thought, well, if we're going to drive, why don't we get a motorhome? Because then we've got a place to stay everywhere, and the dogs are fine. And then we thought, well, if we're going to drive across the country, this is the year to do it, because we both got books out, we've got stuff to promote. So we went right across the country, and in 43 days we did 38 events, and readings and screenings and one thing and another, and so forth. And the reason how this relates to the Maritimes tour is that when the film came out a year ago now, and a year ago last September of 16, we showed it a number of places around Nova Scotia. We were at Acadia University, at Mount St. Vincent, St. FX, and I think that was it. And then we had arranged, through the generosity of the Speaker of the Senate, an official launch at the Parliament buildings, in the offices or the private dining room of the Speaker of the Senate. We had the sort of reception party for the launch and then showed it in Ottawa. That was on the 2nd of October, and we just didn't have time to do anything more in the Maritimes. So we kind of left Discourse and Almaden, off we went, straight to Ottawa. And then after Ottawa, we slowed down. So Kingston, Port Hope, Toronto, Waterloo, et cetera, all the way out to BC. But we skipped New Brunswick completely. And I got a plaintive little note from a woman, an environmental rights activist in New Brunswick, saying, "How come we got left out?"
Right.
And I said, "Well, look, we're going to be back. We can easily do it from Cape Breton." And so once we got back, she picked up that thread, and we said, "Well, look, if we're going to do one, why don't we do more?"
Right.
And,
Exactly.
and other people had been sort of saying, "Are you planning on any screenings around here?"
Right.
And we've had individual screenings like Marguerite and Tatamagouche and,
Okay.
and that sort of thing. But it just seemed to make sense to do New Brunswick as a tour, and so that's what we're going to do. And in a sense, it's kind of like filling in the gap that we left last year when we went flying
when
through
you're flying
New Brunswick.
through New Brunswick and just kept going.
But I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And typically what I do in these things is like in Sackville, for example, we're at Mount Allison, and the visit is sponsored by Mount Allison. So I'm doing a couple of classes. One of them, and the next day I'll be visiting in, and one of them I'll be doing a little later by Skype. And then we're showing the film at the Vogue Theatre downtown on Monday the 24th, I think it is.
Okay.
But that's the typical pattern. I'll arrive in a university town, do something at the campus,
Right.
and something with students, and then a public screening in the evening.
Wow.
And it works out very well.
It does.
Yeah.
Seems
yeah.
to.
Yeah, and I want to get at students. I mean, I want young people to, what I really want is for young people not to feel desperate.
Right.
Because I've heard that so often. I had an experience in a restaurant in Wolfville one time where I was talking to somebody about this, and I said, young people they don't have much confidence in the future. And he said, "Really?" And I said, we had a waiter who was maybe, 22, 23.
Right.
And so I just called him over and I said, "If I may ask you, do you plan to have children?" And the guy said, "Oh, no." And I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Because I don't know what kind of a world I would leave them. I don't think I want to bring children into the kind of future that I think we're going to have."
Wow.
And I have heard that from so many young people, and they may even be right, but they will certainly be right if we don't take action now.
If we let
right?
it go, yeah.
And so to give young people the sense that there is a future, that there are things they can do directly, that there are worthwhile ways to spend their lives, no matter how pessimistic they may be about the future, you're here now, right?
Right,
You can do
exactly.
something now, and you can enjoy it if you get to do the sort of thing I've been doing. It can be really a very, very satisfying way to spend your time.
Wow. That is amazing.
Yeah, and that's why I like to see students, right?
Yeah, of course. That's right.
Yeah.
How many hours a day did you work on this green rights project?
I'm still working on it, really,
Right.
because arranging something like that tour
Yes, that's right.
is a very complicated
But when you were
process.
filming or getting the film ready.
Well, it tends to be in bursts,
Right,
So,
exactly.
for example, a lot of the reason that we didn't go to some of the countries was because we were able to find the people elsewhere.
Right.
And one of the things we did was to go to Ecuador for a big conference of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, which is an international organization of activists pressing to have Mother Nature herself recognized as an entity with rights, which from a First Nations perspective is all backwards. I mean, we are the creations of Mother
right.
Nature. We don't give her rights.
Right.
She gives us life.
Right.
That's the way it really works. Anyway, when we went to that conference, we met a dozen. I think we came back with something like 12 interviews, and they were with world leaders. And we didn't go to Bolivia, but we got Pablo Solon, who was one of the organizers of the People's Climate Conference of 2010 that took place after the failure of Copenhagen.
Okay.
So people like that, Michelle Maloney from Australia, Mamta Ito from the European Union, who's trying to get green rights recognized in the European Union,
Okay.
which may be a little difficult now
Yeah.
that the union itself seems to be becoming a bit unglued. But so we met all these fabulous people, and that saved us from having to go to Australia,
That's right,
having
exactly.
to go to some of the other countries. So very intense. That's like a 2-week session where you got up in the morning and just ran.
Right,
And
exactly.
and then we came back, and it's a more contemplative period when Chris is editing and downloading, and we're translating. We're transcribing and so forth. And then the book itself was a very intense period because
Right.
that was early 2016, and the way the book came about was we knew we were going to have the film done in September. And I thought, early in the year, it's just foolishness not to have a book. I mean,
That's right. If you're going to film, you should have a book.
and if you're going to show the film, you should have something to sell,
That's
i.e.
right.
the book, right?
Right.
And people should have something to take away, so it isn't just a fading memory. And
That's right.
So, but then I thought, well, if I go and try and do a proposal and place it with a publishing house, and the publishing house has to put it through its own bureaucracy and so on and so forth, it usually takes a year,
Right.
you know, and that's pretty brisk, actually, if you get it done in a year.
Yeah.
Whereas if I publish it myself, I can have it a lot faster.
Right.
And so, in fact, I wrote the book and got it edited, designed, printed, and published in 7 months, right?
Wow.
So I started on it in about February, and I had it at the end of August.
Wow, that is amazing.
Mhm. But that wasn't. There were no short days then. Right?
No,
that
that's
was,
not.
That was up
and
in
as
the
a
morning.
writer, you don't have too many down days.
That's true, and I think it's it's almost dangerous, because you kind of get yourself drawn into one project after another, and you're at it sort of from morning till night, and it's probably not. I mean, it's not the right way to do it. It should be on a much more relaxed basis. But a project like this has its own momentum. You know, you're going to be leaving in a motorhome in September.
That's right.
You got to buy the motorhome. You got to equip the motorhome. You got to plan the trip. You got to talk to all the people in the places where
That's
you're going to
right.
have events. You got to get the book done. You got to get the film finished. You got to get the promotional materials together, and
And
so
you
on
got to
and so
sleep
forth.
and eat and
Not much.
not much. That's what you're supposed to.
Well, that's right, but that's where you tend to cheat yourself. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your future plans?
Well, yes, a little is probably the relevant
Yes.
the relevant word, because I'm really not sure about some of these things. For example, what do we do with the Green Interview? This all comes out of the Green Interview project, you know,
Right.
and we're now up to about 100 interviews, and they're available through educational aggregators, educational suppliers of
Right.
materials. So you can get them through university libraries all over the world, and we do have our own site that people subscribe
Right.
to, and it's much less important, but the aggregators are really important. But nobody's really requiring us to do more, and so at what point do you say, you know, I've done 100, that's enough?
Right.
Do we say 150, that's enough? Where do we, and if you do that, and you recognize you're getting older, if anything happens to me or to Chris, the thing ends now, right?
That's right.
Then you don't really, you can't really continue. So we make plans, but we have a certain sense of tentativeness about them.
Of course.
And one of them, though, is the reason for doing this one is because environmental rights give you a tool that you can apply so broadly to
Right.
so many different issues. So is there another theme like that that's worthwhile pursuing?
I'm sure there is.
Well, there is. There are several, and but the one that we've been particularly interested in is the question of measurement. So you hear, for example, Global News the other night was talking about the Canadian economy seems to be on an upswing, and we've had growth of 4% in the GDP over whatever period it was.
Right.
Well, what's the GDP? You know, and how do you measure progress? And is it really progress? And if it is really progress, why are we in the mess that we're in environmentally? You know, is that like, from someone my age? I can remember before we had plastic, before we had television, before
That's
we had
right.
a whole bunch of this stuff. We had perfectly satisfactory lives, and we didn't have an ocean which by 2050 will have more weight of plastic than fish in it, which is the present projection. Now that's considered prosperity. GDP would see that as all having been positive, all the production of oil that
Right.
produces the plastic that goes in the water that kills the fish. There's got to be a better way to measure progress than that.
I would think so.
And there are, we've interviewed a few people like Ron Coleman, who did the Genuine Progress Index for Nova Scotia.
Okay.
And there's Bhutan, where Ron now works, where the king in 1970 declared that gross national product was less important than gross national happiness.
Wow.
Bless his heart.
Yeah.
You know? And then people say, well, that's all mushy, you can't measure that. Well, in fact, as it turns out, you can. The only reason that we have GDP is because it's easy to measure. It's money. And money spent on any purpose gets counted. But good wealth production of any other kind doesn't get counted.
That's right.
For example, your work as a wife and mother, which I'm sure you would be quick to tell me is a lot of work and really genuine work.
Yes.
Right? It doesn't count, right? Because you're
Right.
not being paid.
Right,
And-
exactly.
But on the other hand, if you were working as a housekeeper for me and doing exactly the same thing and I paid you, it would count in the
Right,
GDP. Now, what kind
exactly.
of sense does that make?
Doesn't
right?
make sense at all.
The forest has no value unless you cut it down and turn it into chopsticks and 2x4s. But we all know the forest has huge value. You know, retains water, prevents runoff, produces carbon or absorbs carbon dioxide.
That's right.
You know, provides shelter for animals. You know, is the nursery of biodiversity. None of that gets counted. and all that gets counted is what happens when you destroy that, right? Well, this is one of these things where if we could get our heads around better ways I keep on saying that we're being killed by fairy tale accounting. Well, it'd be nice to do a project on that. We have some of the interviews already.
Right.
And we have some of the businessmen who are trying to do it better. We have a number of. There's also ecological footprint analysis, which just says how much resource does the Earth provide. How many people are they? If you divide the amount of resources by the number of people, that tells you what your fair share is.
Mm-hmm.
Canadians use 9 times their fair share. Right? Bangladeshis use 1/4 their fair share.
Wow.
Now all of a sudden you've got a measure of equity, and so there are a whole bunch of people trying to do interesting things
That's
to
right.
change our heads,
Mm-hmm.
and by changing our heads to change our behavior. So what's a barrel of oil worth, for example? Well, the market says $50. That gives no value to the oil itself. That's only that's if you extract it and sell it, that's what you can get for it, right?
Right.
But if you say it should be worth the human labor that it displaces, and that's why we're so wealthy, because we have, in effect, slaves made out of oil. If you look at that and you say, if you got a guy on a treadmill, and you put him on that 8 hours a day and kept him walking until he had produced the amount of energy that's in a single barrel of oil, how long would that take? And the answer is 8 years. And if you were paying a minimum wage, what would you have paid him? The answer is $225,000. That's what the oil is really worth. But we burn it up and waste it, right? We turn it into plastic bags, and then it's a problem. So there's a whole bunch of things that would. But this is not an easy story to tell. I mean, accounting is not. It's not a gripping narrative.
No.
And so we were both very interested in pursuing that story. But I think we need to find a way to make it visual and a way to make it storytelling. And
Right. So you'll do both.
I don't feel satisfied that we've really got a way of telling the story that has as much drama and tension and humans and juice as the Green Rights one does. If we can figure it out, I think we'd like to do it.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah.
How many books have you written in total?
This is number 18.
Wow.
Yeah.
18 books.
Yeah.
Any screen?
Oh, a lot of
plays?
a lot of that. I 55 radio plays, which is something people don't even really remember as being a thing that the writers do. Quite a lot of documentaries over the years, and for CBC, CTV.
There's a few here that we have too.
Yeah, some here that are. Vision, the one for Vision, the Crimson Flower Battle.
Yes.
And that's another one of these. It was such a wonderful story. I mean, when you started looking around the island and saying, well, how did people here engage with the Second World War? This little tiny island off the east coast of Canada, how did they engage with it? And we found there were scores of veterans, and they had the most amazing experiences. And I can't remember now what we have in the Crimson Flower. I think we may have Ralph Britton's story, which is one that people are always astounded by. The guy who later was our fisheries officer flying under the Eiffel Tower in a mosquito fighter bomber, under the arches of the Eiffel Tower. And was an ace, had an ace pilot, shot down 6 German planes and so forth. And,
it's true, though.
Oh,
those are
spectacular
stories that are amazing, really.
Yeah, they are. And
then Salmon Wars.
And Salmon Wars was
another one that we have here as well.
Yeah. And that's one that we that also came out of the Green Interview. And, because I guess I had just started the Green Interview. We hadn't done very many of them anyway. And I wrote a column about salmon aquaculture, and I got a call from a reader in the valley who was an ardent salmon fisherman, and he said, "You're absolutely right about this, but it's a newspaper column. It's forgotten in no time.
That's right.
What can we do to keep it in the public eye?" And I said, "Well, Chris and I have started this Green Interview thing, and between the two of us, we have 100 years of experience making documentaries. We could make a documentary." And he said, "How much would that cost?" And I said, "Well, let me go and talk to Chris." So we went and we looked at, said, what's the minimum amount for which we could make that film? Figured that out, told our friend. And he said, "I think I can raise that," and did.
Wow.
And went off and basically raised the money, and we went to the Ecology Action Center as a fiduciary partner, and made the film.
Wow.
And,
That's amazing.
and then there again, that's the same that's the same. The documentary rests on the interviews, like the deck on the pilings of the wharf.
That's right.
Because there again we have interviews, a whole cluster of interviews about fisheries, salmon aquaculture, and so
That's right.
forth. So Alexander Morton out on the west coast, Daniel Pauly, the great fisheries scientist, and David Montgomery, who wrote the story, the book about salmon, the great book about salmon, and so on. All these various people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the documentaries and the Green Interview site really play well together, and that
They
would be
do,
another
yeah.
one of the things
Yeah.
about if we did the Counting What Counts is the one we were.
What is the website for Green Rights? What is your website for
It's-
people that don't know? and
Yeah,
would like
it's
to
just www. Well, there's a greenrights.com website,
Okay.
but the sort of parent website of all these projects is www.thegreeninterview.com.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And all the
So-
information about all of these books.
Yeah, that's all.
interviews
And then
it's
there's,
all there.
well, not all the books, but all the interviews.
The
There's-
interviews, they're all there,
so
yeah.
The 100 interviews are all on that site. And the various components of the Green Rights Project are on
Right.
the Green Rights site. And then there's the SilverdonaldCameron.ca site, which has all the books and
And everything, yeah.
all the other stuff that, I wouldn't say it's got it all, but
So-
that's the site that's about me as a writer
Right.
and the projects I've been involved with. Yeah.
So how did you get the name Silver Donald Cameron?
That's one of the gifts from Cape Breton.
Okay.
Because I was a professor at UNB, and I quit in 1971 and bought this little house in Discoos,
Okay.
and started publishing on national magazines. And most of the magazines I was working with then are gone now. The Canadian, Star Weekly, Weekend Magazine, all these,
Okay.
they're all gone. But so I started to publish under the name Donald Cameron, which was the name I was given at birth, right? And people couldn't tell who it was.
Right.
Because it's like publishing under the name John Smith.
Right. Exactly.
And when my mother called me up and she said, "There's a lovely piece in Weekend Magazine this week by Donald Cameron. Is that you?" And I thought, if my mother can't tell, right, which
Yeah.
Donald Cameron this is. So I puzzled at it for a long time. And if you go to my website, it's at SilverdonaldCameron.ca,
Right.
and look under writer and articles, there's an article there called "What's in a Name" that reviews this in more detail.
Right.
But I thought, I don't really want to change the name.
Right.
But on the other hand, I mean, I clearly can't go on being mistaken for other, other
Donald
people.
Camerons.
And it kind of came to a head when I had been asked by the CBC to look into a story in Port Hawkesbury where the light industrial park had been built on the United Church Cemetery, lands that belonged to the United Church
that's right.
Cemetery.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
And so they thought this was quite a story, and could I look into it? So I called the mayor, who was Billy Joe McLean. This is back in '72 or '3
Yeah.
or '4.
He was the mayor for a while.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
forever more or less.
Yes, that's right. Until he retired.
Yeah, and so I called him and I said, Mayor McLean, it's Donald Cameron. He said, "How the hell are you, you old fart?" And I had never met him. But after a moment he said, "Wait a minute, which Donald Cameron is this?" And I said, "Well, I'm a writer. I live in Discoos." "Oh," he said, "I thought you were my buddy that runs the A&W here in Port Hawkesbury," right? So that was kind of like, that really drove it home. And finally I was talking to Tom Gallant, a singer-songwriter buddy of mine, and one night, and he said, "You know what you need is a Cape Breton nickname." And he looked at my hair was always white,
Right.
since I was about 19, but my eyebrows and mustache were black. And he said, "The white hair, the black eyebrows and mustache, Silver Donald Cameron." And I thought, that's right. He said, "It's a Cape Breton nickname."
That's
and of
right.
course, that's exactly what Cape Bretoners do. I mean, it's the same thing here, that, the Acadians do the same thing.
That's
the
right,
Scots
yeah.
do the same thing. You give them the nicknames because then you know,
Yes.
which Peter Boudreau it is. It's Pierre Lemoustache. Oh,
Right.
okay. That's
Yeah,
right.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. And well, it's worked like a charm ever since.
Wow.
Nobody in the country, I mean, the rest of the country doesn't seem to do this and doesn't seem to know it, and I get asked that question quite a lot. But I explain that there's a kind of an almost a folk poetry in the way that people do the nicknames. I mean, there's one fellow that got in Inverness County, went to a Scottish concert, and had a little too much rum, and
Yes.
lay down on the field, and another fellow backed over him with his pickup truck. And didn't do a lot of damage. The guy was largely liquid anyway, but
Right.
anyways, he did, and the fellow's been known ever since as Speed Bump.
That's his nickname.
That's
Okay.
his nickname, yeah.
Well, that's good.
It's worked very well.
Yeah.
Worked very well.
Yeah. A lot of people know you. Like, I'm sure most people call you Silver Dawn anyway.
Yes.
And not Dawn or Dawn.
Well,
Older.
among friends and family,
Yes,
it's
among
always
friends,
Dawn.
yeah.
In the Scottish communities, where they're kind of used to a lot of this kind of thing, and there's a lot of nicknames there. You'll often hear somebody with a kind of a Gaelic ring or a Gaelic ring to his voice saying, "Well, now, Silver Donald, I was wondering what you'd be feeling about this," and it seems the Silver Donald just flows with that kind of a voice.
It does flow.
Not so much with downtown Toronto voice.
No, but it does. It does flow here for sure.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you very much for coming in.
You're very welcome. It's been a real pleasure.
Yes, and I hope we can do this again sometime. I'd like to thank Silver Dawn for coming in and speaking with me today. Be sure to check out the Defenders of the Dawn episode, which will be broadcasted on Telil in the next few weeks. If you'd like to know more on this project, on the Green Rights Project, you can check the website, www.greenrights.com, and you can check out also Silverdonaldcameron's website as well to find out any information on the Green Rights Project. Thank you for watching this Telil Talks episode. If you have any future show ideas, please give me a call at 902-226-1928. Or you can email angel@telil.tv. This has been your latest Telil Talks episode. Thanks for watching, folks.